Hello and welcome to Face to Face. Today we are going to be talking about one of the most important issues in the world, 9/11, and what really happened on that fateful day, because the tentacles of 9/11 are reaching out to us even today, here in 2011. This is being filmed at the very end of February. Our Prime Minister has just gone down to the United States, and they are talking about putting a single border around both of our countries. There's no coverage in the media about this. And the main push for that single border around Canada and the United States and getting rid of the border between us, they tell us comes from 9/11 because of the terror threat we face. Wars have been caused because of 9/11. It is still one of the most important issues in the world. And we do need an independent investigation to find out what happened on that day. Our guest today is Dr. Niels Harrit. Dr. Harrit is a professor emeritus from the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. And Niels, maybe you can tell us tell us something about yourself and how you got involved in all of this.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a chemistry professor from Copenhagen, Denmark, which is in Europe on the top of Germany. And I have been teaching organic chemistry there for more than 40 years, 42 years to be exact. And I'm 66 years old. And regarding 9/11, I got involved with the issue accidentally 4 years ago. My wife has been a peace activist all her life and has a very she's known for this in the Danish community. So probably this is the reason why she had sent to her 3 DVDs anonymously 4 years ago. And on the cover of these DVDs there was a big iceberg, and it was called Under the Surface. And we thought for a while that this was regarding global warming. And we were very busy, so they were lying around, maybe for a month or two. I don't remember. At some time, we put on one of the DVDs on the DVD player, and it turned out to be a presentation by an American professor called Stephen E. Jones from the Brigham Young University in Utah. And in this presentation, among many other things, he showed a building collapsing, which turned out to be Building 7 of the World Trade Center complex. And if some of your viewers here have not heard about this before, it was a 186 meters steel-framed high-riser, 47 stories, which came down 7 hours after the North Tower of World Trade Center collapsed. And there were two obvious. It was a shock for me to see for 2 reasons. One is that I haven't heard about this before.
So even until 4 years ago, you had never heard that?
No, like most other people, I had accepted the official conspiracy theory about Osama bin Laden and the 19 hijackers. I believed that they actually had flown into World Trade Center and that the Twin Towers had collapsed due to the impact of the airliners. And so sitting there watching a 3rd high-riser collapsing was a shock. For this simple reason, why haven't I heard this before? Why isn't this a gigantic issue in the press that there were 2 airliners, but there were 3 skyscrapers? I mean, everybody who can do math and count to 3 should recognize that there is something here which maybe should be looked closer into. This was one thing. The other thing was the way this building collapsed, because it's almost 200 meters high, and it comes straight down into its own footprint. It's going down just like this. And being trained as a scientist, you have developed an intuition for you're trying to understand whatever goes on around you in the physical environment. And if you have a good education, most of the time you understand what is going on, why you get electricity out of the wall, how the car is running, and all kind of different phenomena. But this I just could not comprehend. Why should this building, apparently for no recognizable reason at all, suddenly just collapse just like that? And when there's something you do not understand, you have a problem. So this is for once I had a problem. And it took me a couple of weeks actually to digest this experience and to understand that this was important. And from that day on, there's been no way back for me as an individual, as a person. And because I would say many people maybe consider that they found 9/11 at some time in their life and in time and space. I would rather say it is 9/11 which finds us. And 9/11 found me in the chemistry department of University of Copenhagen. And I realized that this meant that there was something I had to do. Because I can read the reports, the official technical reports. And as I understand, I did not understand the physics of what actually was happening. So I looked into this, and ever since, the more you look into it, the worse it gets.
And you're talking about the entire 9/11 issue. The more you look at it, the worse it gets.
Yeah. But maybe we should come back to the entire issue a little later on and just point our attention to this building 7, because or maybe I can give the result is there's no doubt that this building was taken down in a controlled demolition. I consider this to be mainstream scientific conclusion. There's no way around this conclusion. So there are so many observations which is only compatible with a controlled demolition. The most important is, the official explanation is that this building and the towers came down due to office fires. But it has never happened before in history that a steel-framed high-riser should collapse due to fire. And this is a very basic thing in science. Science is based on observation and experience. And since there have been maybe 400 or 600 reported fires in steel-framed high-rises, and at no occasion it has collapsed due to fire, means that the experiment has been done. The experiment has been done, and the conclusion has been drawn. A steel-framed high-riser simply does not collapse due to fire. So for the official investigators to claim that this was what happened this day is violation of scientific principles. Just for this simple line of reasoning alone. But next, the way this building is collapsing, it's falling what we call in free fall. The trajectory of the 47th story when it goes down is like an object falling with no support. It's going into free fall speed, which means that all supporting elements within the steel frame structure at that point was eliminated. As in, to see the whole building going down completely symmetrically means that all the elements, which are 24 core columns and 57 perimeter columns, all of these columns had to be cut at the same time for this phenomenon to happen. And this is basic, very simple elementary physics, and the conclusion is obvious that this building was taken down in a controlled demolition.
We're talking about building number 7, which came down, I think, around 5 or 5:30.
5:20.
In the afternoon of September 11th, 2001. It was the third building that collapsed on the day of 9/11. Dr. Niels Harrit of Copenhagen University is saying that that is simply not possible. The way the building collapsed and the excuse given for its collapse, which is office fires, simply is not possible. Now ask yourself, what does this mean if that third building's collapse, which has never even, it's barely ever made public. You said you yourself didn't find out about that until 2007. Why are they keeping it a secret? Who is keeping it a secret? Why can't we know the truth about what happened on that day?
Yeah, well, it has not been shown in the mainstream media after the day itself. And funnily, this is a little footnote, it was announced, the collapse was announced by BBC 20 minutes prior to its collapse.
Yeah, imagine what that means.
Yeah, but from that on, my wife and I, we started to, first, after a couple of months, just realizing that this was important, I wrote a little essay, submitted it to a newspaper. It was rejected, it was pushed around in the building. I submitted it for another Danish newspaper, and surprisingly, they wrote me back and say, hey, will you please extend it actually to the double size and we'll take it, which they did. And it came, we are in March 2007. And so it was, and this is a fairly, not big, but very influential Danish newspaper. And it was only about Building 7. Now look, here is a building which came down in a manner which is only compatible with controlled demolition, and that's it. Absolutely nothing happened. I thought it was just, if I just stand up on a soapbox and tell the truth, it will run by itself. But absolutely nothing happened.
No official response, no media follow-up?
No, absolutely nothing. It was the quiet was deafening. But so then I decided to put together a talk and presentation and take it from the bottom up, which actually meaning addressing each individual on a one-to-one basis and starting giving talks. And I have done this for a long time, and giving this presentation almost 100 times in many countries, all outside Denmark as well. But what happened then is another person in Denmark, actually an Australian, he translated this little essay into English and put it on his webpage. And from that reason, it was recognized. I didn't consider this. I said, okay, please do that. I didn't think much about it. But when it was translated into English, it was also recognized by a website called Patriots for 9/11 Truth. And I was asked if I would allow to be taken in the category scientists, for scholars, I think is the category on Patriots for 9/11 Truth, which meant that eventually that I was asked to review a paper by Kevin Ryan, who's a chemist, also in the 9/11 Truth movement. A very interesting paper about the fires following the collapse of the World Trade Center. And then I got in contact with Kevin Ryan and eventually was asked to join a team of scientists who was investigating the dust after the collapses of these three high-rises. And in the dust we have found remains of thermite, which we call nanothermite. It's a modern material. I'm giving a little overview. I know that we have to explain this more in a little while. And this has attracted definitely some attention, because the findings of this material in the dust is, well, Professor Jones, who I just mentioned, called this the last nail in the coffin. Other people call it the loaded gun of 9/11, because this material can be used as an explosive or an incendiary for cutting steel structures, which was happening on September 11th. The steel structures of these three high-rises were cut prior to their collapse.
So you found, after you got involved with the 9/11 Truth movement, you did a study, or were involved in a study, that found traces of nanothermite in the dust of the collapsed buildings.
So maybe I should explain first what thermite is. It's an incendiary. An incendiary is a reactive material or mixture which works by means of heat. You can use it for setting on fires and arson, and it's used for that also. But the old-time thermite was a discovery by a German chemist called Hans Goldschmidt in 1893, where he discovered that if you take very finely divided aluminum and mix it with very finely divided rust, two powders, you mix these two powders like gunpowder, and if you can make them react, the reaction is very violent in terms of heat. Enormous amount of heat is developed, and elemental iron is a product from this reaction. And it comes out with a temperature of 2,500 degrees centigrade, which is very, very hot. It's a useful process since it can be used for welding. You get molten iron out of the process, which can be used for welding, say, train rails or tram rails, and was patented in 1898 and used for the first time in 1899, more than 100 years ago. So it's an old invention and very useful, but it can also be used to destroy other steel elements, in particular armor, because the iron coming out is more than 1,000 degrees hotter than the melting point of iron and steel. So you can use it in charges, in military grenades and torpedoes. And it's been used as such for 80 years at least, many years. So, and this is thermite as an incendiary. And now what we have found is nanothermite, which is not the same thing as Hans Goldschmidt invented. It is in this case, the material has been manufactured using nanotechnological methods. In nanotechnology, you build the material from the atom, from an atomic scale and upwards. We call it the bottom-up approach, in contrast to the top-down approach. When, if you want to make finely divided aluminum, you take a chunk of aluminum and you cut it up and you grind it eventually. This is a top-down approach. But in nanotechnology, you build the materials from the atomic scale and upwards. So it is not old wine or new bottle. There are two consequences of this approach which distinguish it from the good old thermite approach. First, the ingredients, which in this case is aluminum and iron oxide particles, are much more intimately mixed in the material. So they react with each other much faster and therefore more hot, more violently than they do in the old-time ordinary thermite. And next, due to the way of preparing it, you have the option of putting in other chemicals. Because I stress that the old-time thermite is an incendiary. It works and destructs things by means of heat. But an explosive, like dynamite and all kind of stuff, explosives works by means of pressure. Explosives knock things over. There's a chemical reaction where pressure is developed and so you knock things over. Now, when you're making nanothermite, you have the option to put in other stuff in the mix, which use the energy of the chemical reaction and transforms it into a pressure wave. So the nanothermite can be used as an explosive or as an incendiary. It can go either way. You have this option. And it also maybe has rocket fuel properties in this case, based on observations.
I think that what you have found then, you and others, in the dust of the World Trade Center buildings is traces of nanothermite.
Yeah.
Now you saw a DVD of the collapse of building number 7, and you think that it's impossible for this building to have fallen because no other building has ever fallen because of office fires, and yet that's the official explanation for what happened to building number 7, the third building that fell on the day of 9/11, a building which many people have still never heard of. You did the study and you found traces of nanothermite. Now, how would nanothermite be used to bring down this building?
This we do not know exactly. We do not know which role the nanothermite we found played in the demolition of the 3 towers, because the twin towers were definitely brought down also by controlled demolition. Not an ordinary controlled demolition. Just from seeing the videos of the 2 towers and Building 7, you'll observe that they're distinctively different, because the towers were brought down from the top down, starting at the impact of the airliners, while Building 7 was taken down from the bottom. This is more classical, conventional approach, if you want to, of a controlled demolition, where you eliminate the whole internal structure and then the building comes down in free fall.
So the entire internal structure of Building 7 was eliminated in an instant, and the building then just collapsed down.
Not exactly, but the last remains of the internal structure was eliminated. These buildings are over-dimensioned. There's a headroom, so you can, in terms of stability, so you eliminate what is not needed to keep the building up. So what remains after preceding the collapse itself, so what remains after this weakening of, and this is where you use thermite as an incendiary. You can use thermite for cutting the steel beams, and it's soundless. So as I see what's going on is that thermite has been used to cut the steel structure almost, so it just remains standing. And then the very last step of the demolition, the explosive charges come in, because they have to be timed very accurately in a very precise time sequence within nanoseconds in order to produce what we are seeing, namely a completely symmetrical collapse into its own footprint.
Now, we have somebody who I think is a very serious person, Dr. Niels Harrit, a longtime chemistry professor from University of Copenhagen, saying that he believes that all 3 buildings on 9/11 were brought down as controlled demolitions.
Yeah.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, imagine the importance of this statement, and lots of people believe the same thing. There are over 1,000 architects and engineers.
1,400, I think, at the moment. 1,400.
In the group Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, who say the same thing. There are thousands and thousands of other serious people making exactly the same allegation, that everything we've been told about 9/11 may not be true, that they believe that all 3 buildings were brought down as controlled demolitions. Now ask yourself, what does this mean when our politicians and our media will never even give this a mention? Niels, you mentioned when we were talking earlier about how much is at stake because of this 9/11 issue. Maybe you can just go into that a little bit.
I think that what happened on the September 11, 2001 is the most important event to our generation and for our children. I think it's more important that the bringing down of the Berlin Wall, and I think it was 89. I think it's, and the consequences of this event should be obvious to everyone, but it is not, but it's happening at such a slow pace that people maybe do not connect the dots.
Please connect them.
No, I would rather say that if you have a problem being with the environment or being with the economy, which is very serious, maybe not so much in Canada, but in the rest of the world, I think they are deep in the red. Global warming, if you care, did I say environment, whatever war is going on, and I think the whole civilization actually is in the balance these days. And this is everything we love. And this is very serious. If the planet Earth will still be there, no matter what we do. There'll always be spiders and rats. But what we call civilization, if you care about music, this is what we're talking about. If you care about the health of your grandparents, this is what we're talking about. If you care about theater, literature, if you care about people, kids playing in the playground, whatever you care for, whatever you love, this is what is at stake here, our civilization. And it's very fragile, and it can easily be lost. And I see 9/11 as the pivotal event which has triggered a whole series of evolutions. Civil rights is one obvious thing. In the airport, I had a body scan when coming here to Canada, in Amsterdam.
Given to you by the Canadian?
No, by the Dutch, by KLM, the Dutch airliner, and my wife. We were scanned, and this means that somebody actually can see your genitals. You stand there naked on their screen. If you go to Heathrow Airport in London, you'll see old women having to take off their shoes. And we all know that you're not allowed to take more than 100 milliliters of a liquid on board an airplane. It is all due to 9/11, and we have not seen even a single piece of forensic evidence for that the attack on the United States was carried out by Muslims. What I call the official conspiracy theory. Maybe we should rest a little. Conspiracy, I'm sorry. Conspiracy means that more than two people are talking together in order to do something illegal, okay? So everybody must admit that Osama bin Laden and the 19 hijackers were in a conspiracy according to the official version of events, were in a conspiracy to carry out the attack. So it must be considered a conspiracy theory, the official explanation. Now, there's been no forensic evidence for that this is true. We haven't seen any piece of evidence for it, which is remarkable since Denmark, when it got into the Afghan war.
And so did Canada. We are at war in Afghanistan because of 9/11. No evidence ever been presented, according to Dr. Niels Harrit.
And this happened actually. Both our countries got into this war on Wednesday, September the 12th, less than 24 hours after the attack. This is a story on its own. But we share some experience with the Afghan war. Maybe you're not aware that Denmark is a relatively small country, but we are in the Helmand province of Afghanistan. And due to that, Denmark actually has the highest number of casualties relative to the number of citizens in Denmark among the NATO countries. Now, which country has the highest number of casualties relative to the number of troops in Afghanistan? Canada. So we share some experience in the Afghan war, and we set out to catch a criminal, we were told, by the name of Osama bin Laden. And we haven't seen the evidence for this person actually being guilty in the crime. And he is not wanted by the FBI for the attack on 9/11.
And that's worth repeating too. Mr. Osama bin Laden this is official, is not wanted by the FBI for the attack because there's no evidence. Yeah, imagine what this means.
If FBI admitted this quite openly, a journalist called Ed Haas, I think as I recall, called FBI and said, why is he not wanted for 9/11? And the FBI, the spokesman, his name was Rex Tom, he responded because FBI does not have any hard evidence connecting Osama bin Laden with 9/11, so he's not wanted for that. I think this is one of the many reasons why 9/11 is important, and I considered it also as pivotal. Is the key. 9/11 is the key. If you want peace and democracy in the world, 9/11 is the key to the whole thing.
In other words, an understanding, an honest understanding of what really happened on that day is key, because then we'll see that we are being completely misled by whom? I mean, obviously the people who run the country, because it's the politicians and certainly the media, who are owned by the corporations in Canada, are giving us only the official. I don't know where even that story came from. Is it the George Bush story? Is it the corporate story that Mr. Osama bin Laden and 19 hijackers did all of this on 9/11? And yet Dr. Harrit got involved in this because in 2007, years after 9/11, he saw a DVD showing the collapse of the third building that fell on that day, and was amazed that he did not know that a third building had fallen, as many people in Victoria and certainly many people in Canada don't know that a third building had fallen. He didn't believe what he was seeing was possible, because no steel building has ever collapsed because of office fires, which was the official story for Building 7, investigated, and found in the dust of the three buildings traces of nanothermite, a very modern incendiary and explosive that could have been used to bring down the three buildings.
At least it shouldn't have been there.
And it shouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
Now, let's ask some questions about exactly has there been a scientific study? Is that what you're involved in, or is it research? What exactly maybe have you found, and how was it found?
Well, it was found, as I told you, Stephen E. Jones should have the credit actually for getting the idea of looking for remaining explosives. Whenever you have an explosion, there's always something left. It's never complete. So after an explosion, the police can always go in and see what kind of explosives was used in an event. And due to some early reports, investigations of the dust from a private company called the R.J. Lee Group and from the United States Geological Survey, Jones had, at that time there were many independent observations implying that thermite had been used. So Jones should be given the credit for taking the initiative to look into the dust with a microscope, because what we are talking about here are tiny, tiny particles. You can only see them under a microscope.
Can you just tell us who Dr. Jones is?
Stephen E. Jones was a physics professor of Brigham Young University in Utah. And he was put on early retirement due to his activities and doing this research, and he is now actually moved from the city and has finally retired. But he started these investigations and took the initiative to it, and I was brought into the team, invited and accepted. So together there are 9 authors in total on the final publication. Each individual has contributed some to the final thing. So what we have found is this material, these tiny, tiny chips where the aluminum, as I explained, and the iron oxide, the rust, is mixed very intimately.
And this creates the nanothermite.
Yeah, they react with each other when it finally takes off.
How is the nanothermite placed on? We have steel beams. How is the nanothermite placed on the steel in order to cut it?
This is a question I'm very frequently asked, because to take down these buildings, you need huge amounts of explosives and incendiaries, whatever should be. How did they get into the buildings? And my first answer is on pallets. I mean, if you have to bring in explosives of these amounts, I would put it on pallets and I'd get a truck and then drive it up and then move it in. and you only have to have a good appointment with the man at the door in order to get in. And of course, you should not write on the side of the package that these are explosives for demolition of the WTC. You do not do that. But of course, I understand your question is more subtle. How do you actually get access to the steel frame structure? Now, Kevin Ryan, who as I mentioned once already, has written a series of 4 papers called Access to the Towers. Because of course we do not know the exact answer to your question, how they were brought in. But you can point to the facts, for instance, like which companies were tenants on the floors where the jetliners came in, which companies had the contracts doing renovation. There was a renovation program of the fireproofing of the whole structure, which had went on actually for some time. Which companies had the contract with the renovation of the elevator shafts, one of the biggest renovation programs for elevators in the towers. Which companies had the contracts on the cleaning up, which companies had the contracts for security in the buildings. And Kevin Ryan is putting all these individual dots together, and the web coming out of it is maybe coincidental, but it is quite a coincidence. Let me put it this way. So anyone who being interested in actually who had access to the towers, I would recommend Kevin Ryan's structures.
And how do people Google that? Just Kevin Ryan?
Oh, Kevin Ryan, yeah. K-E-V-E-N, and Ryan is Iris, R-Y-A-N, yeah. Now, and access to the towers. Or just Kevin Ryan and access, and they will get right to it, yeah.
And once again, we have to ask why we, the people of Canada, are not given any of this information. I mean, isn't this interesting and exciting news? Shouldn't CBC, CTV, the Globe and Mail, our own local news media, CFAX, the Times Colonist, shouldn't they be all over this? I mean, here is a story of monumental proportion, of monumental issue. Nothing. Why is this quiet? Where do the decisions come from to keep this quiet? We have got to be asking these questions because, as Niels said, so much focuses on 9/11. If we're being lied to about this and misinformed, then we have to question everything that's going on around us. I've been given a few questions to ask here, and one is about the deniers, those who say that everything that we are talking about isn't possible or didn't happen. And one thing they say is that the thermite that was discovered in your research is actually a natural occurring nanothermite that was created by the collapse of the buildings themselves. In other words, the pressures and etc. actually created a thermite dust.
Well, this is a fundamental misunderstanding in violation of basic chemical principles. Because it's true, like the cladding, the towers they were covered aluminum, and people say aluminum was brought in by the airliners. And of course, if you have a steel frame, it is rusty once in a while.
And nanothermite is just that, a mixture of aluminum and rust.
It is not just that. It is much more than that. And because it's the mix of the ingredients. It is like, because you have potatoes here and you have meat here, you do not have a stew, do you? And there's no, just eating the potatoes and eating the meat does not give you what you would experience by eating the stew. And it's the same thing here. I usually tell a little story, a little picture, about matches, ordinary matches. They're made of wood. There's a little sulfur on the top of the individual match. It's kept together by a binder. There are pulverized glass in the top of it, and there's phosphorus on the side of the box when you strike the match. Now imagine you have a campfire, and you throw into the fire some small pieces of wood, a little sulfur, a little pulverized glass, a little phosphorus. Now, would you expect the next morning in the ashes to find a box of matches in the fire? And it's the same thing here.
Yes.
Just because you have ingredients, they will not come together to make a reactive mixture. And this fundamental chemistry, you cannot form a reactive material at high temperature. You cannot. Getting a reactive material like matches by just mixing the ingredients at high temperature in the campfire. So this is to imagine this is a violation of basic chemical properties.
Okay. So the issue that the thermite is, or the nanothermite was a naturally occurring dust, is
well, people
carries
saying
no
this should
weight.
provide the evidence. I mean, I know they will not be able to provide the evidence because they are violating basic chemical principles. But then make the experiments.
Show us.
And yeah, and actually Stephen E. Jones did this experiment. He took a rusted steel beam and he poured onto molten aluminum, which melts at 660 degrees centigrade. He poured molten aluminum on the rusted steel beam, and guess what happened? Nothing. So he did the experiment. He's a great experimentalist.
Could the dust have come from somewhere, some other source than the dust of the collapsed buildings? Or could it have been put in deliberately and somehow faked in order to...
This is strange. When we were writing this paper you were referring to earlier, 2 or 3 pages, I think, is reserved for this chain of custody thing. Very meticulously documenting where the samples came from, who were the individuals collecting the samples, where were they collected, at which time were they collected, and the statement has been signed by these individuals. Some of them have told on video, actually testified on video, the collection. This chain of custody has been accounted for very accurately. I thought this was ridiculous when we wrote the manuscript, because I have more than 60 scientific papers in the best journals, and never have anybody accused me of falsifying the samples. This is completely ridiculous. Now, why should I falsify the sample? So I thought there was no reason to bring this in. But my fellow authors luckily insisted for this having doing, because what you're saying is actually the only objections which have come up, that the samples have been spiked or even falsified. But due to this chain of custody, it's virtually impossible unless somebody has been broken into the homes of these individual persons and actually put nanothermite into the samples. Now, if this is the case, you will... Wow.
Yeah.
But how did they get it? How did they make it?
It's
too far out.
Has the paper been published?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, our paper. Yeah, in an open chemistry journal, in an open journal.
If people want access to the paper itself, how can they find it?
Well, the very strange thing, now, as we are talking here, the whole journal has disappeared. This happened 3 days ago, and we are on February the 25th today, or the 20th. And it's happened 3 days ago that the whole journal disappeared. Together, I must say, maybe I should be a little careful, because the journal disappeared from the web together with another journal called the Open Journal of Chemical Engineering Mathematics, in which Stephen E. Jones and Kevin Ryan and others have made other publications related to 9/11. These 2 journals disappeared from the server of the publisher. But the one about mechanical engineering mathematics, it has come back. So it may be that the journal we published in may come back also. And if this happens, it is directly accessible on the web, and the link to it can be found on all the serious 9/11 websites, like 9/11truth.org.
Okay, 9/11truth.org, and then type in nanothermite paper or something like that?
I guess that there's a link to this paper all over.
Okay.
And I hope it works. But as of today, as of this moment, it has disappeared. So I hope it is just an error.
Yeah. Is there a hard copy of the journal that gets mailed out?
No.
Oh, this is strictly an online journal, and the journal in which your paper is published.
Yeah, there's not a printed version, but this is not unusual. We had 4 good reasons actually for selecting what we call an urban open online journal. One thing is that it is open; it's free for everyone to download. Otherwise, the conventional, the old-time journals, you have to have an affiliation with the university, or a subscription, which is very, very expensive, or you have to go to a library in order to get it. But this time, everybody can download it. Point 2, the paper, the article itself is so long, and there are 33, I think, color figures in it, which will never be accepted if there had been a hard copy version of it. Third, we still have the copyrights of all the pictures, which is very important. When I'm giving my presentation here in Victoria, I can show the pictures from the paper, which I could not do if it had been one of the old times journal, but where the publisher actually had the copyrights of all the pictures. And fourth, my dean was on the external advisory board of this journal. My dean in Copenhagen, the Faculty of Natural Sciences, was on the external advisory board of this journal, but he disappeared 4 days after the publication of our paper. He just disappeared from the board.
So lots of interesting things going on, unfortunately, as we would expect.
Oh yeah, yeah.
As we would expect.
Yeah, it's dangerous. Information can be dangerous.
Yes.
Both on an individual and a social level, you know. Adam and Eve was thrown out of paradise because they took a bite of what you call the tree of, what do you call it in English? Adam and Eve in paradise. They ate from the tree of
knowledge.
Knowledge, okay.
Knowledge of
and
good
this
and
is dangerous, so they were banned from paradise.
Once again, we just see the possibilities of how there is a force out there that simply, I mean, since 9/11, and if you look at even the news commentators on the day of 9/11, those reporters outside the buildings were talking about hearing explosions occurring. The firefighters were talking about it. The police were talking about it. And yet, since the day after 9/11, all of that material has simply been hidden away by the media and never reported again to the citizens of this country. So we have to ask ourselves again, what is going on here? And we have to ask that question very seriously of the entire power structure of this nation. And what are they doing? Where can someone get nanothermite?
Nowhere. This is not something you go out and buy. This is produced only in military facilities, in big military institutions in the world. It is the explosives of the future are based on this technology. We call them composite materials, and those who are working at it, they brag about it as being explosives smaller, cheaper, and nastier than the old-time explosives. So we know the research is going on, but it's military research and you cannot buy it. This is high technology material.
So in other words, the material of which you found dust from in the dust of the World Trade Center building collapses is a military explosive.
Yes. Well, we still don't know which role, what we found, we still do not know where it fits into the demolition scheme. And I do not speculate in hypothetical blast scenarios. We know that incendiaries were used for melting the steel structure, cutting the steel structure by temperature. We know that explosives were used. This you can just see when you see the towers collapsing. You will see steel beams and girders being thrown up in the air. We are talking about steel beams from 3 to 20 tons being thrown 100 meters away and going like spikes into other beams, and they're being thrown upwards. The forces involved in the collapse of the towers were enormous. So we know explosives have been used.
In order to bring down the World Trade Centers 1 and 2 and 7 as
definitely,
well.
Absolutely. So
we know explosives were used. This is what he's saying, and yet
just watch, yeah.
And yet, where is our media? Where are our politicians? If we know explosives were used, then what in the world is going on?
But we do not know where the red grade chips, which we found, fit into this whole picture. And
I'm sorry, say that again. We do not know where.
We don't know where the nanothermite fit into this picture. We do not know the exact role played by the reactive remains we found. Actually, I believe that two kinds of incendiaries were used, but this is we'll be getting a little bit more complicated. So I should not take my conclusions any further regarding the nanothermite. It shouldn't have been there, and this is never found in other demolitions, dust, or fires, collapses. It's not been known prior to 9/11.
You mean the finding of nanothermite in the dust, showing that it was
this material
there.
And so we do not know exactly what it is. But somewhere out there must be somebody who knows exactly what it is. So if it was something innocent, I would expect them to come forward and tell us, this was just paint or something like that. But 2 years has gone by since the publication of our paper, and this hasn't happened, which makes me very confident, actually, that our conclusions are not, that we haven't overlooked something.
Now you're on a speaking tour of Canada.
Yeah.
This is at the very end of February when this interview is taking place, the 26th, I think.
Okay.
Where have you been in Canada, and where are you going?
Well, we started in Edmonton 4 days ago, and we have been to Vancouver the day before yesterday, and now we are in Victoria. And we have met many wonderful people. I must also we started 3 days as a tourist in Toronto, and we have met so many wonderful people. And I hope this should be heard with the Canadians. You are very friendly and wonderful people. Take that in. And so we are proceeding we're flying back to Toronto, and then I'll give actually a regular chemistry presentation at the University of McMaster on Monday. Tuesday, I'll give the nanothermite presentation also at McMaster. We'll go to the University of Western Ontario in London, and we'll go to University of Toronto, and this will be it. So it's a total of 7 presentations on this tour.
How have the crowds been where you have spoken? I believe you spoke at UBC.
Very, very receptive and very open. And this I've learned is another very nice, property of Canadian communities, that they're actually open and responsive and ready to listen. And also the gap between, actually the leap between realizing something and taking action is a big leap. And in Denmark, many people understand, but they just don't move. And Daniel Ellsberg, the very famous activist back from the Vietnam War, has said, I have learned about my fellow citizens that they understand, they learned, and then they proceed to neglect it. And this, I would say, goes to the Danes, but apparently the Canadians, they actually, in my impression, they're more easier for them actually to react.
Well, let's hope we do.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we're almost out of time. Dr. Harrit, just one last question. Why are you doing this?
Well, I'm opposed to crime. I'm against crime. I think crime should be investigated, and eventually the criminals should be convicted and put in court. And this hasn't happened in terms of the terror attacks on 9/11. There has not been an ordinary criminal investigation. So this is one thing. Another thing is that I have 6 grandchildren, and in 10 years' time, they may be old enough to ask me, "Grandfather, which side were you on?" And I'm going to tell them I was on your side.
We've been talking to Dr. Niels Harrit of the University of Copenhagen. We've been talking about a very important subject, 9/11. Thank you very much for watching, and please, please keep this issue in mind always, because we have got to come to the proper conclusions about what happened on 9/11. It's simply too important to do nothing about. Thank you for watching Face to Face.